Hey, how's it going, guys? It's Vesper, and today we're going to go in depth with the Street Fighter 6 parry system. We're going to break down everything we know about it so far with the footage that we have, and I also want to talk about why we shouldn't worry too much about this mechanic being too strong. There is always a lot of talk about parry in general whenever a new Street Fighter game comes out, and I'll admit myself that I have my own concerns as well when I first heard about parry. But the Street Fighter 6 parry is pretty unique. It's not quite like Street Fighter 3, where it originated from, and it's not quite like Street Fighter 5 either, now that I mention it. And I'll get back to this topic later in the video and I'll explain all the details why. I also want to remind you guys if you've been falling behind in the news, and there has been a lot, we've been covering a whole bunch of system mechanics on the channel, so be sure to check out those videos if you missed them. Now before we begin, guys, let me do my usual disclaimer that I always do. So I have not personally played Street Fighter 6 myself. All this information that you're about to hear is based off the footage I've seen, and anything that I've heard, I'll be sure to point that out specifically. Also, everything that we're about to talk about is subject to change because this is from an early build. In fact, we've confirmed this already with the new Gao footage that this build is already old and they've changed things from then. And finally, I want to give a big shout outs to Theory Fighter, who's done personally a lot of testing on this parry mechanic. He's one of the first I've done this that got a lot of this information, as well as giving me permission to use his footage to show you guys what I'm talking about. And of course, I'll provide a link to his original video in the video description below. Okay, disclaimer done, let's get started. Alright, so Drive Parry is a new universal mechanic in Street Fighter 6 that every single character can use. Now to perform a Drive Parry, you just press both medium buttons down at the same time, like V-Skill in Street Fighter 5, so medium punch plus medium kick. And it will initially cost half of 1 bar of drive gauge to use. Now there's two types of parries you can do. First, you can just tap the medium buttons down and your character will start to glow blue, and there'll be like this kind of violet slash pink outline on your character, and they'll go into this unique stance that's showing you that they're doing the parry. And this unique stance is different for every character. The other option is you can choose to hold down the parry instead. And if you continue to hold the parry, it will cost the initial half of 1 bar to initially use, and then it'll continue to drain your drive gauge as you continue to hold it down. You can hold it down for as long as you want until your drive gauge completely runs out if you want to. So if you successfully parry your opponent's attack, and that is they attack you while you're in your parry stance, you'll gain drive gauge for it. And if you parry a multi-hitting attack, you'll gain lots of drive gauge for it. So successful parries is very, very rewarding to do. It's one of the main ways you gain your drive gauge back quickly in Street Fighter 6. And you can parry a lot of things. You can parry all normal attacks, unique attacks. You can parry special moves. You can parry even the OD versions of those special moves. You can even parry supers, all multi-hitting supers. It's really crazy. You can also parry Drive Impact, which is very important since Drive Impact, when you block it, it pushes you back for a potential wall splash. So parry is a very important ability that you need to understand how to use. Now in Street Fighter 6, you don't have to worry if the attack hits high, mid, or low, if it's an overhead or a jump in or whatever. Drive Parry is magical. It will parry it all. It doesn't matter if it hits you from above, below, from the left to the right, if they're mixing you up. As long as you hold down those two buttons, you basically have this crazy shield that surrounds you that makes you impervious to a lot of attacks in the game. On top of that, parry only has 1 frame startup, meaning the second you press those medium buttons down, you'll instantly parry. This also means you can hold parry even when your character is getting up off the ground, so you can even parry your opponent's media attacks. It's a reversal option. And yes, I know what I'm telling you sounds extremely strong, overpowered. This is baby game, it's too easy, but don't worry, I'll go over the weaknesses soon. Now there's another function to parry in Street Fighter 6 called Perfect Parry, and this is really cool. By looking at the footage, if you perform a parry within the first 1 to 3 frames of your opponent's attack, you'll be rewarded with a perfect parry. Now the perfect parry will be much more rare, and of course it's harder to do because you have to see your opponent's attack coming, but you'll know you perform a perfect parry when the game actually freezes. The whole screen's gonna freeze, letting you know you're successful, and on top of that you get this huge ink effect, so it's very blatant. And then you'll get rewarded by being able to cancel that parry directly into whatever attack you want for a counter attack. like the traditional parry that we're used to from, Street Fighter 3. Now, looking at my notes for this video, I wanted to mention that perfect parry rewards you with extra drive gauge as well on top of that, but now that I look at all the footage, I'm seeing weird different results. Sometimes I see you gain 2 bars for it, sometimes I only see you gain a half, and sometimes none at all. It's really strange, it's kind of buggy, and I'm not surprised because this is like early build footage, but I think it's safe to assume in the future they're going to make it so you gain extra bar. I mean, you should. Like, perfect parry is tough to do. And on top of that, there's a lot of scaling after perfect parry. So I'm assuming that might be a bug as well. But I mean, obviously, I don't know. So I think that was just worth mentioning to you guys. When I finally get my hands on the beta, I'll be sure to recheck this and figure it out. But anyways, unlike the perfect parry where you can cancel the recovery out of it into an attack, you can't do this with a normal parry. So just to clarify on this, it doesn't matter if you tap parry or hold parry, your character still has to go through recovery. Even if you successfully parry your opponent's attack, you have to, parry it and then you recover and then you can do whatever action you want to do. This is very similar to like reuse V-Skill 1 parry in Street Fighter 5. Now, during this whole recovery period of a parry, since it is technically considered a move, if the opponent hits you during this, they will score a punish counter, which is really bad because that means they're going to drain bonus drive gauge from you when they hit you. And they'll also get a unique counter hit as well, meaning they can do some exclusive combos on you, so it is dangerous. Finally, although I mentioned you can cancel your recovery into an attack, there are some things you can. You can cancel it into a drive rush, for example, or you can cancel your parry into a drive reversal, like it's a V reversal in Street Fighter 5. But obviously, this will cost additional drive gauge to do this. Okay, let's do a quick recap now on all the things I mentioned about parry. So the tap parry is going to act similar to like Street Fighter 5, where your character goes into a stance, but it starts up in one frame, and then they're going to have recovery after. So even if they parry, they go into recovery. It works very similar to like reuse Mind's Eye, his V-Skill 1. But if you perfect parry on the frames 1 to 3 at the very beginning, you'll get the screen freeze, you'll be able to cancel the recovery out into whatever you want. That's going to work like your traditional parries in Street Fighter 3. And then finally, if you hold the parry down, this is something more unique, like a Street Fighter 6 thing, where it acts kind of like this big shield that you can continue to hold down, and it'll continue to lose drive gauge for as long as you want. And you can parry multi-hitting attacks with this and be rewarded with gaining a lot of drive gauge if your opponent, falls for the bait. Alright, now that you guys know how parry works, it's time to address all the concerns. I'm going to mention a lot of scenarios here to convince you guys that it's not too powerful or too easy to use. So if you guys are arguing with someone about this and they're really worried about parry, just link them to this part of the video. So drive parry has 2 huge weaknesses. First, throws, and second, recovery. So throws beat parry in Street Fighter 6, and I'm assuming command grabs as well. And it's a guaranteed punish counter. It doesn't matter if it's during the active frames of the parry or the recovery, it's always going to be a punish counter. And punish counter throws in Street Fighter 6 have a unique property where it pretty much does double damage. It's absolutely insane how much damage it does, and it also causes a hard knockdown. And hard knockdowns in Street Fighter 6 means that they can back rise, which means they're in throw loop territory. The second biggest weakness is recovery. It's not like Street Fighter 3 parry where your character taps forward and you don't see anything. Your character is actually going to go into a stance and be open for an attack if they don't successfully parry something and your opponent doesn't fall for the bait. So it doesn't mean you get a free punish either if you do parry your opponent's attack, because you still have to go through those recovery frames. According to Hatson on Twitter, he says it's about 27 frames of recovery, and that's a lot. So this means, for example, if you parry your opponent's light attack, you're most likely not going to be able to punish them at all. You might even get hit by their second light attack if they're mashing and you try to do a medium, right? If you parry a medium attack, it still might not even be able to punish. It's going to be mostly for really big heavy attacks, right? Like a Chun-Li heavy punch or a sweep, for example. In fact, if your opponent tick throws you, you still might get thrown because they'll do a light attack into a throw. You're going to be stuck into recovery, so they'll probably get the throw off anyways. That's going to be one of the first things I test. If you anti-air parry somebody and it's not a perfect parry, they're most likely going to land and recover before you can even counterattack anyways, kind of like Ryu did in Street Fighter 5 until they changed it to his EX Dragon Punch, but that's besides the point. So the general purpose of parry so far, at least at the beginning level, is going to be mostly for, hey, my opponent is going to be doing an attack, I see it coming, I'm going to parry this, or I need a shield, for example, and you'll be gaining drive gauge for it. And if they do a multi-hitting attack, you'll be rewarded even more, right? If they're throwing just non-stop fireballs, some kind of pattern, there's a lot of quick fast moving attacks in Street Fighter 5, especially EX moves. Drive parry is going to help you with that, right? In general, it'll help in some mix-up situations. If it's ambiguous left and right, you can parry as well. Of course, your opponent reads that, they can empty jump, throw you, they can mix up, throw you as well, right? But it's just another defensive tool that they're giving us for Street Fighter 6. This is the main defensive one. It's also the main way that we're going to protect ourselves from drive impact if you don't want to use your own drive impact, that is, but you can parry it. Okay, let's talk about the whole zoning topic now, because this is one of the main things that I was concerned about, that parry would hurt. You know, zoning is an essential thing in Street Fighter. I know a lot of people don't like fireball spamming, but you know, it's Street Fighter, man, and parries would technically hurt it. But Street Fighter 6, it doesn't seem to be that way. Yes, if your opponent is just throwing fireballs full screen, you can just parry it and they're not going to gain too much of an advantage. But if they tap parry every single individual fireball, they're going to eventually lose more gauge than they're gaining. It's more when you just tap parry and hold it down and they continue to throw fireballs as you're holding it down, then you'll start to get net positive because you're no longer spending that half a bar initial cost because you're holding it, right, and it's draining. So in that case, yes, then that will stop parrying. But keep in mind that you're going to have recovery on each time you parry this fireball, and during that recovery, your opponent can close the distance on you, and you can be, you know, in trouble by then, right? If they throw a slow fireball and start dashing in and closing the distance on you, you'll be stuck in recovery, and that can be really bad. Also, looking at the super meter, if you parry a fireball, your opponent actually gains just as much super meter as you do, so keep that in mind as well. And on top of that, fireballs seem really fast in Street Fighter 6. Maximilian mentioned this several times, and looking at the footage, they do seem really fast. So when you use fireballs around the mid-screen range, they look really hard to react to. So I wouldn't expect someone to be able to parry them all. It would be pretty tough, especially when you're sticking buttons out. And then finally, with the whole zoning thing, you cannot parry in the air, so you won't be jumping over fireballs and they're going to DP you and you parry. You can't do that. Street Fighter 6, it's ground parries only. Oh, and finally, you can't perfect parry fireballs. That would be ridiculous if you could. The screen would be freezing like every 3 seconds. That'd be super annoying. So no perfect parries on projectiles. Okay, let's address the wake-up game issue. So a lot of people are concerned about players just simply holding down parry on wake-up because it's 1 frame startup, and therefore it will beat meaties. And yes, that is true. You can protect yourself from meaty attacks while holding parry down, and it will parry in the first frame. But don't forget, throws are one of the most common Oki options in Street Fighter since the dawn of time. Okay, people always throw. And if you get thrown, I cannot stress enough how punishing that is. They'll get a punish counter on you. You're gonna lose bonus drive gauge because it'll cost half a bar to use the parry in the first place. Then you lose more bar from getting the punish counter. Then you're put into a hard knockdown state. You're right next to Ryu. Look at his forward throw. Look how close he is to you. You're now in the exact same situation where if you choose to parry again, you're gonna take double damage again from another throw. So it's very dangerous. You also cannot, at this time, there is no footage of it, and many people have said this, you can't perfect parry on wake up. So I'm assuming that means you can't perfect parry as a reversal option on frame 1. This makes perfect sense that it wouldn't be in the game because that'd be really dumb because then you would just mash parry while in block strings or on wake up, and if your opponent does do immediate, you get a perfect parry and get a free punish. That'd be really dumb. So hopefully they never add that to the game. I'm sure Capcom wants all parries to be very deliberate, you know, rare and exciting as they should be. And I should remind you guys that perfect parries require a 1 to 3 frame window. That is a very small window, guys. We're not going to be seeing it every 2 seconds. Maybe like an anti-air perfect parry when this game first comes out, but people will learn to bait it. You know, Street Fighter 3, the parry window is 10 frames, guys. You know, if you just tap forward. Red parry is like 3 frames. I think it's 2 against specials. So it's pretty much the same window as a red parry. But at least if you do a perfect parry, if you see something really obvious your opponent's going to do, whether it's like an overhead attack's going to come, right? Or you can get a huge comeback because the screen's going to freeze and it guarantees you a huge punish, it'll be hyped to see, which is what we want. So also keep in mind that drive parry also requires drive meter. So that means you cannot parry at all when you're in burnout mode. No big parry comebacks when you're in burnout. So I think that pretty much wraps up all the information and my thoughts on parry so far, at least for now before this video gets too long. I'm really interested in what you guys think about parry, the pros and the cons. what you guys think about this system. It's going to be a huge part of Street Fighter 6. I hope you see some really cool reads with this, with the perfect parry system, and we'll get some more details when this beta finally rolls out. So until then, guys, I'll be covering everything that is Street Fighter 6. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. Also, check out our Discord channel if you guys like to discuss Street Fighter 6 with us. And we also have like a news update page to keep everyone updated as well. Be sure to check out that Discord. Okay, guys, till next time, peace.